This is the third part of the chapter of light where we focus on lenses. And this video is catered more for the syllabus 5086 as come to 6091. So under combined science, we have just one less thing to do. We do not need to draw the ray diagrams. So this will be the focus in this video, where we talk about what happens when the beam of light converges when it hits the converging lens. I'm not talking about in this video concerning the focal length and action. I'm focusing more on the description of the characteristics of image. So it's written as this because we are doing in comparison to the characteristics of plane mirror images. So for lens images, we just have three pairs, and these are the three pairs you must know. It could be diminished or magnified, it could be upright or inverted, it could be real or virtual. But what's important is that in your answers, you have to get one from each pair. So there'll be a total of 3 words, one taken from each pair. So what we actually would see later on, right, is that based on location, based on where my object is placed relative to my focal length, I will get 3 words out of these 3 pairs. It could be diminished, inverted, and real. It could be magnified, upright, and virtual, but there will always be 3 out of the pairs. So now let's take a look at a simulation to see how my characteristics of my image changes as I vary the distance of my object from the lens. If you want to try the simulation, it is found in this website, and in the website it uses an applet or a simulation that was done by Nerd Island Studios. It's a fantastic simulation. Give it a try by yourself if you need to. In this simulation of a lens, we're going to see what happens to my image properties depending on where I place my object. So now, my object can be placed at a distance that's very far, way more than 2f, at 2f, which is twice the focal length, between 2f and f, exactly at f, right, and less than f, close to my lens. So remember that every time we talk about it, right, we have always 3 pairs of properties. The first one is considering, is it going to be diminished or magnified? Secondly, is it going to be upright or inverted? And thirdly, is it going to be real or virtual? So let's take a look at it when now my object, which is depicted by this upright arrow here, is really far from 2f. Okay, in a textbook, which I can't really do over here, it says when it's almost at infinity, what would happen to my image? I would see that my image would be diminished because it's much smaller than my object. It is inverted because it's upside down, and it's real because my light rays are actually meeting, right? When they meet and I put a screen there, an image will be formed on that screen. So now, as I go closer to my lens, as I approach 2f, we can see that while my image is still diminished, it is getting slightly bigger, and also is moving further away on the opposite side of the lens, correct? Now, what happens when my arrow reaches exactly 2f, right? What we do see is that both my image and my object are the same size. Now, it is neither diminished nor magnified, but is inverted and is still real because the light rays are actually meeting. It can be formed on the screen. Now, what happens when I move between 2f and f? When I go between 2f and f, I realize that my image is no longer diminished. It has now become magnified. It is much bigger than my object on the left side of my lens. It is still inverted, it's still real, right? But it's getting very magnified. Now, it continues behaving that way all the way until I reach exactly at my focal length, which is somewhere here. At this point, my image doesn't exactly have a place where it's meeting. It is an image that's being casted at infinity. That's how a spotlight works. What happens when I now go less than f? What I do see is that my image is no longer on the opposite side of the lens. It has now become on the same side of the lens as my object. And wow, it is really big. It's magnified, isn't it? It's clearly magnified. Now, unlike what we do in our textbook, in our syllabus, in this simulation, I'm not able to have a dotted image, but we do see that the light rays meeting this image is still dotted, right? This is what we have over here, this much magnified image over there. This is virtual. Now, even though it seems to be getting smaller from here to here, we will still see that compared to the object, which is this one that's moving over here, compared to the object, my image is still magnified. So don't look at this simulation and say, hey, it's getting smaller. It got smaller compared when I was closer to my focal length as compared to now when I'm closer to the lens. It might be smaller in that sense relatively, but compared to my object, my image is still magnified, right? So once again, as I go closer to the lens, my image gets further and further away from the lens until I hit F, and then that my image now appears on the same side as my object, and it's still very much magnified, but it gets closer and closer and closer and closer to the lens. In this case, I would say that my image is upright, magnified, and virtual. As you saw in the video, as I vary the distance between my object and my lens, it changes how the characteristics of my image would be. And it seems very clearly that there's a couple of zones that we can consider, and we can draw out a diagram that helps us to remember what my characteristics image would be based on that distance, or I would say location of my object. Now look something like this. So here I've drawn a simplified diagram where this is supposed to represent my lens. This is one focal length away, and this will be two focal length away. In the diagram, in the picture over here, or in the video over here, you see that this is my focal point, my second focal point, right? So F to F. So I always realize that when I'm on this side, everything that is beyond 2F, I will always have an image which is diminished, which tells me that if I go less than 2F, everything I get will always be magnified. See, when I was less than 2F, my image was always magnified. Even when I went to this point over here, less than 2F, it was still an image that is magnified. I'm not talking about the other things, just between diminished and magnified, right? And that tells me that if I were to look at this zone over here, everything to the left will be diminished, everything to the right of 2F will be magnified. Now, what else do I see? I realize that as long as I am to the left of F, right, that means more than F, I will always have an image that is inverted, correct? But once I went less than F, much closer to the lens, my image would always be upright. So that tells me that, hey, there's another zone over here. As long as I am on this side over here, all the images I would get would be inverted, right? And then once I go to less than F, all my images will be upright. Now, finally, every time I had my object more than F, my light rays will always meet at a point where it can be produced on the screen, correct? But once I went less than F, or even at F, right? So remember this object, I would have my light rays not meeting at any one point on the opposite side of the lens, but traced backwards, I will get a virtual image, which means whatever I have on this side, as long as on this side, my images will always be real. And the moment my object moves to this zone over here, my images would always be virtual. So what you have used to sit into my class, right? One way to remember these 6 letters is discipline master is really ugly. But I went online and they gave me an example, and the example looks like this to remember these 6 letters, and it is do monkeys in raincoats use vacuums? Yeah. Do monkeys in raincoats use vacuums? Do monkeys in raincoats use vacuum? Right? So just remember this guy. He's like, huh? Do monkeys in raincoats use vacuums? Well, let's figure it out. How do I use this, how do I use this? So let me now put an image, an object inside, then we're going to see. If my object, like this over here, was more than 2f away, so let's use that in red. This is my object. I would know that if it is here, then it belongs in my D zone and my IR zone. Can you see that? It's here and here. So it'll be diminished, inverted, and real. And the image is diminished, it is inverted, and it's real. Right? Let's try again. Let's use a blue color object over here. If my object, which is in blue over here, is in this region between 2f and f in front of my lens, on the left side of my lens, what would my image be? My image would be magnified because it's in this zone. It will still be inverted and real because it's in this zone. And we see, hey, right? It is magnified, it is inverted, and it's still real, right? My light rays are still meeting here, it can be produced on the screen. Finally, if I have an object which is over here, right, which is less than f, very, very close to my lens, what would it be? Take a look at it. Take a look at this diagram. Let me move away my monkey over here. In which zones do I find it, and what would the properties be? Yep, it will be magnified, it will be upright, and virtual, which is what we see over here. My object is here, right? And my image was magnified, it is upright, and because the light rays don't really meet, right? They only meet when you look backwards into it, this is virtual, which is what you get when you use a magnifying glass. And that's actually the last part of this chapter, is to know that in each position, right, what can I use it for? What are the uses for at different points or locations, right? So what are they? Based on your textbook, which you can definitely see, these would be the main 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? If my object is at infinity, really, really far away, kind of like looking at planets, right? This is where we use our telescope. If it is more than 2f, like you try to look at a tree that's or mountain that's really, really big, that's well how your eyes as well as the cameras, that's how they work, right? If you want it to be exactly the same size, that's what you would use for a photocopier. I don't think I'm saying it right, but that's the idea, right? Now, projectors is where your object is small and you make it really, really big. You project it on a huge screen, right? Your image must be magnified. Well, that's where we have our projector. Now, what do you need to shine a spot of light really, really far away? Well, that's where you put your object exactly at the focal length. That's how the spotlight works. And once you have your object even closer to the lens, closer than f, that's how the magnifying glass as well as the microscope works, right? So typically, these are the 6 things you need to know concerning my location from the lens, and that is how the chapter ends. Ooh,